The sun hung low over the Florida coastline. The Indian River Lagoon's rough waters took on a drab golden hue. The late summer of 2014 had left the estuary hazy and erratic due to a recent spate of thunderstorms. Strong currents frequently confused marine life by mixing fresh and salt water. It was under these conditions that United States Coast Guard officer Ryan L. Thatcher found himself in a challenging situation. While performing a routine vessel inspection near Sebastian Inlet, Thatcher, 29, who was experienced in patrolling Florida's waterways, had been tasked with inspecting a small fishing boat flagged for a potential safety violation. He and his two crewmates, Chief Petty Officer Delmar Henshaw and Seaman Carter Wells, boarded the smaller, rigid, inflatable boat while their cutter, the United States Coast Guard cutter Ridgeline, stayed close by. The fishing boat, Salty Horizon, an old trawler, bobbed erratically in the water. The sunburned and weathered men aboard appeared impatient as Thatcher approached. The air was humid and the smell of gasoline, salt, and fish was overpowering. Although there was no visibility below the surface, the water lazily lapped against the boat hulls. The water was clouded with sediment from debris washed into the estuary by recent rainfall. As Thatcher reached for the railing to board the trawler, an invisible force suddenly threw him backward, launching him into the water and knocking the wind out of his lungs. Before his crewmates could even realize he was gone, a whirlpool of red bloomed in the water. Before Thatcher's brain could fully comprehend what was happening, a sharp, crushing pressure encircled his right leg, sending excruciating pain through his body. The sharp teeth, set deep into his thigh, were the only thing visible through the murkiness. The bull shark, which could have reached a length of 9 feet, clung to him relentlessly. Henshaw and Wells responded immediately, calling for help via the helicopter and grabbing for anything they could to drag him back. However, the shark's overwhelming strength was already pulling Thatcher downward and toward deeper water. The beast resisted Thatcher's attempts to free himself as he flailed and struck at its muzzle. The water was dark and hazy with blood. Panic began to set in, but then his training kicked in. Reaching for his dive knife, he fumbled for his belt. When his fingers found the handle, he slashed at the shark's thick hide, driving the blade downward. The blade glanced off the creature's sandpaper-like skin, barely making contact. The shark's teeth continued to rip into muscle and bone as it violently shook its head. Henshaw plunged in from above, splashing through the red water. With all his strength, the senior officer seized Thatcher's vest and pulled. Thatcher experienced a sudden release of the shark's teeth after the force was sufficient to break its hold, leaving him in a state of searing pain. In a desperate, haphazard attempt, Wells and one of the trawler fishermen leaned over the side and pulled Thatcher out of the water. The deck was stained a deep red from the shredded flesh and exposed muscle of his leg. Despite the nearly excruciating pain, Thatcher gritted his teeth, fighting the urge to slip into shock. The radio crackled with distress calls, and the Ridgeline's crew mobilized. Thatcher was retrieved within minutes by a rescue helicopter hovering overhead. Seawater sprayed over the deck due to the downdraft, as Wells and Henshaw prepared to transport their injured officer. He left a trail of red droplets in the wind as the helicopter lifted him from the boat. Trauma surgeons at Melbourne's Holmes Regional Medical Center worked tirelessly to save Thatcher's leg. Due to the destruction of important arteries from the bite, extensive reconstruction was necessary. Doctors cautioned that even if the surgery went well, his mobility would never be the same, as infection remained a constant concern. According to marine biologists, the shark may have been attracted to the area by the boat's engine vibrations, perceiving Thatcher as struggling prey. Bull sharks thrived in both fresh and saltwater habitats and were renowned for their aggression and adaptability. Estuary attacks weren't unusual, but this one's intensity rocked the Coast Guard community. Thatcher had a difficult time recovering. His endurance and patience were tested over several months of physical therapy. It took all his resolve to start walking again. He couldn't stop thinking about the attack, how quickly everything had changed and how close he had come to death. Despite the trauma, he resisted letting it define who he was. Despite all the odds, he returned to active duty a year later. He continued, though his movements were more deliberate and his eyes lingered on the water longer before getting into smaller boats. His mind and leg remained scarred, even after his return. He was treated with a mixture of sympathy and admiration by his fellow officers. Some of them even joked that he now had an official Coast Guard tattoo. But Thatcher never laughed. He was more aware than anyone that his survival had been influenced by luck. He had been underwater for moments when he thought he would never come up. It was harder for his family to accept. Although his father, a former Navy man, simply nodded in silent understanding, his mother almost pleaded with him to step down. The question that had been on everyone's mind was finally asked by his younger sister, Lena. Every time Thatcher went near the water, she would ask, "Why go back? Why risk it again?" His answer was straightforward. It was his duty. He had enlisted in the Coast Guard for the responsibility, not the excitement. Giving in to fear meant resigning, and he wasn't someone who would do that. His first time back on patrol near Sebastian Inlet was nerve-wracking. The boat engine hummed beneath him, vibrating through his bones. The water looked the same as always, placid on the surface, but hiding perils underneath. He gripped the rail more firmly than usual as he forced himself to board the smaller ship. Still a reliable crewmate, Wells shot him a knowing glance but remained silent. Both of them recognized it. Although the attack had altered him, it had not destroyed him. He remained wary in murky waters, took extra precautions, and never let his guard down. But deep down, he knew the ocean was erratic. Regardless of his level of caution, dangers would always exist. Yet, he had decided to confront them. Many years after leaving the military, Thatcher stood on a beach, observing the waves as they rolled in. A group of kids splashed and laughed in the shallows. His pulse briefly quickened as a shadow, a harmless school of fish, moved beneath the water. He exhaled slowly. He would always carry the scar the ocean had given him, but he chose not to be afraid of it. Ultimately, he had lived. The late afternoon sun of 2012 glistened on the warm waters off the coast of Fiji. Even though shark sightings had been reported in the region, fishermen frequently cast their lines into these waters. It was a risky tradition, but one that provided a livelihood for many. The waters surrounding Fiji, particularly near Becca, had long been known for their abundance of marine life and the lurking presence of predators. 42-year-old veteran fisherman Mark Haleomana had spent the majority of his life in these waters. Tall and lean with sun-creased skin, he carried the quiet confidence of a man who had spent decades at sea. He and his fishing companion, Elias Eli Kolokukui, had gone farther than normal on this particular day because they had heard about a sizable school of mahi-mahi located outside the reefs. Despite the calmness of the ocean, something was moving beneath the surface. Mark was standing at the bow of their small fishing craft, skillfully putting out his line. As he made his first catch, a large mahi-mahi thrashed wildly against the pull while the reel hummed. An invisible predator noticed the ferocious splashes that caused ripples in the water. Eli looked at his friend and chuckled about Mark's increasing good fortune while sharpening a fillet knife by the cooler. Their haul looked promising, and the day had been generous. Then the first indication of trouble came, a shadowy figure moving slowly and deliberately beneath the waves. Mark was too preoccupied with his catch to notice it, but Eli sensed an uneasy change in the mood. The sea was unusually still. His stomach twisted in warning as he looked at the water, the hairs on his arms standing. A few days later, eager to chase the abundant mahi-mahi further out, Mark and Eli made the bold decision to travel beyond their usual fishing grounds. They set their sights on the pristine waters off the coast of Vanuatu, drawn by tales of unspoiled fishing spots teeming with life. The journey was long, but promising. The vibrant blue expanse of the Pacific stretched endlessly around them as they cast their lines in foreign waters. As Mark bent to unhook his catch, a huge figure emerged from the depths. With its powerful jaws clamping down on Mark's leg, the tiger shark, at least 12 feet long, charged forward. With a sickening splash, his body hit the water as the force yanked him violently over the side of the boat. He screamed, but the rolling waves quickly swallowed it. For a brief moment, Eli froze, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Then instinct took over. Reaching for the nearest weapon, a spearfishing gun lying close to the cooler, he hurried to the edge. The water below churned with red. While Mark struggled to kick the shark, he couldn't break free from its relentless hold. The beast's weight dragged him beneath and the surface closed over his head. Silence for a moment. Mark's face contorted in pain as he broke the surface, gasping. Eli steadied the spear, his hands slick with sweat. and aimed carefully. With a deep breath, he plunged the spear into the water, striking the shark's side. The beast released Mark just long enough for him to scramble toward the boat, his hands clawing at the metal rim. Eli grabbed him under the arms, adrenaline fueling him with strength he didn't know he had, and hauled him onto the deck. Mark collapsed, his leg mangled beyond recognition. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the boat's worn wooden planks. He sucked in ragged breaths, his face pale as shock set in. Unfazed, the shark turned around and rammed the side of the boat, rocking it violently. Eli stumbled but kept his grip on Mark. He knew they had to leave quickly. Eli shoved the throttle forward and slammed the boat into gear, launching them toward the shore. For a few breathtaking seconds, the shark followed before disappearing into the depths. The return trip seemed to take forever. Mark's grip on consciousness loosened as his breathing became labored. Eli, panic rising in his voice, called for help, barking into the radio. There was a prompt response. Paramedics would be at the docks. When they reached the shore of Vanuatu, Mark was barely clinging to life. Locals rushed to help, pressing down on his wounds in a desperate attempt to slow the bleeding. The ambulance doors flew open, and the medical staff worked frantically to stabilize him. As Mark was loaded in, Eli watched from a distance, his hands shaking. Unwilling to let him go alone, he climbed in next to him. Silence and blood-soaked gauze filled the ambulance ride. For a moment, Mark's fingers fumbled at Eli's wrist as his eyes flickered open. An unspoken understanding and a silent farewell passed between them. By evening, Mark had passed away from his wounds despite the doctor's best efforts. The news spread fast. Another fisherman lost to the sea, a grim reminder of nature's harshness. Experts speculated that the splashing of the fish had attracted the shark, triggering its predatory instincts. Others believed it had simply been a stroke of bad luck. Eli struggled with the loss, plagued by guilt. What if he had reacted sooner? What if he had been in the water instead? These hypothetical scenarios haunted him. He avoided the ocean for months, unable to step onto a boat without feeling the phantom presence of his friend beside him. Eventually, the sea called him back. Not for fishing, not for financial gain, but for closure. One evening, as the sun was setting, Eli stood by the beach, holding a single sacrifice in his hands. A wooden fish carving that Mark had made years before. He waded into the water and let it drift, watching as the tide carried it away. The ocean had taken, but it had also given. And somewhere beneath those endless waves, Mark's story lived on. Aurelia, a luxurious cruise ship, sailed through the Mediterranean's serene sapphire waters in the summer of 2009. It set out from Barcelona, Spain, heading for the Greek islands, a popular route for travelers seeking adventure and leisure. Among the more than 2,000 passengers aboard the floating palace of luxury was Daniel Voss, a 35-year-old businessman from Chicago. Daniel had booked the trip with a group of friends eager for a break from his high-stress life in finance. His favorite way to enjoy the sea was from a safe distance, though he had always loved it. As the ship glided across a section of open water between Italy and Greece on the third night of the journey, the moon illuminated the waves with a silvery gleam. Passengers gathered on deck, chatting and enjoying cocktails on a lovely evening, the light breeze adding to the atmosphere. Daniel positioned himself near the railing, attempting to photograph the moon's reflection on the water. He leaned forward slightly, adjusting his angle for the perfect shot. That was when the ship swayed unexpectedly. In an instant, he lost his balance. His body tilted forward, and before he could grab onto something, he went over the railing. The sound of his gasp was drowned out by the wind as he plunged into the darkness below. For a moment, there was only silence. Then came the impact, his body slamming into the water like a stone. The shock of the cold jolted him, and instinct took over. He flailed, kicking to keep himself afloat. Above him, the ship's lights twinkled, moving farther away by the second. A cry for help died in his throat as he fought against panic. On board, a woman nearby had witnessed the fall. She screamed, alerting others. Within minutes, crew members were mobilized. The ship's horn blared as the search operation began. A lifeboat was lowered, its crew scanning the dark waters with flashlights, calling Daniel's name. The hours-long search stretched into the early hours of the morning. With his strength diminishing, Daniel felt as though he was walking on water. He had managed to take off his shoes, but his wet clothing still weighed him down. Every muscle in his body ached. The overwhelming emptiness around him was oppressive, despite his best efforts to remain composed and conserve energy. All he could hear was the sporadic sound of waves splashing. He thought about his family and friends back home. Then, a change in the water was felt. There was a strange presence. He initially dismissed it as paranoia, but then he sensed a strong, unnerving current running beneath him. There was something in the air. He tried to stay motionless, but his heart raced. Despite the unpredictability and mystique of the ocean, he knew he was not alone. The first impact came hard against his side. A force, solid and deliberate, sent him reeling. The realization of what was happening hit him like a shockwave. A bull shark, one of the world's most hostile species. The splash from his fall must have attracted it. Daniel's mind raced as he kicked out blindly. But the shark had not finished. A second hit, this time more forceful, knocked the air from his lungs. Then came the searing pain, its jaws clamping onto his leg, a sensation like fire and pressure all at once. He thrashed, the water around him turning warm with blood. The shark shook its head violently, tearing flesh, testing him. From a distance, the rescue boat spotted him. A flashlight beam caught the water turning red. The crew shouted orders, accelerating toward the scene. But in the water, time moved differently. The pain in Daniel's leg was unbearable and his vision blurred. He felt the shark release him only to circle back. Then he heard the sound of an engine. The boat was near. Sensing the disturbance, the shark hesitated. One of the crew members grabbed a pole, swinging it into the water to ward off the predator. Another grabbed Daniel, carrying his bleeding body on board. He gasped, shivering violently, his body drenched in seawater and blood. The crew moved quickly, applying pressure to the wound in a desperate attempt to slow the bleeding. But Daniel had lost too much blood. His breathing was shallow, and his skin was pale. When they returned to the ship, the medical staff was prepared, but the damage was too great. By the time they reached the infirmary, his body was shutting down. The doctor worked frantically, but Daniel's pulse weakened. Within minutes, he was gone. News of the incident spread quickly among the passengers. Shock turned to grief. No one could believe that their fun trip had led to such a horrific end. Experts later analyzed the event, suggesting that the shark had likely been drawn by the disturbance in the water, mistaking Daniel for struggling prey. Bull sharks were known for their aggressive nature and their ability to tolerate both salt and freshwater, making them among the most dangerous to humans. The Aurelia continued its voyage, but a somber mood hung over the ship. Daniel's friends, who had come aboard expecting a carefree adventure, found themselves in disbelief. The cruise line conducted an internal review, increasing safety protocols, reinforcing railings, and adding more surveillance cameras. Daniel's body was flown back to the United States, where his family held a quiet funeral. His parents struggled with the senselessness of the tragedy. His friends, once filled with excitement about the trip, found themselves haunted by memories of that night. For those who had been on the Aurelia that summer, the Mediterranean no longer seemed as inviting. It was beautiful, vast, and full of life, but also full of things unseen, lurking beneath the surface, waiting. The boat rocked gently in the waters off the coast of Stewart Island, New Zealand. It was early morning on March 8, 2024. And the research team aboard the Blue Horizon was preparing for another day of fieldwork. Paul Harrington, a 38-year-old marine biologist, stood at the edge of the deck, staring into the vast expanse before him. This was his life's work, studying great white sharks in one of the most active predator zones in the world. Stewart Island had long been known for its dense shark population, drawing researchers from across the globe eager to understand their behavior. Paul had spent years researching great whites, dedicating his career to learning about their hunting patterns, migration routes, and human interactions. The team had been stationed in the region for nearly a month, deploying tracking devices, studying feeding habits, and observing the sharks in their natural habitat. Today, they planned to conduct a controlled cage dive to observe their movements up close. Alongside Paul were his colleagues, Dr. Evan Carter, a shark behavior specialist, Jenna Lawson, a marine biologist focusing on predator-prey relationships, and Ryan Hale, the boat's captain and safety diver. They had worked together on previous expeditions, but today's dive carried a unique sense of anticipation. The team had been tracking an unusually large great white shark for weeks. Tagged with a GPS device, it circled the area. Still, it behaved unpredictably. lingering near the boat longer than usual and ignoring the bait typically used to lure the sharks in for observation. The morning had started like any other. The crew checked the equipment, ensured the steel dive cage was secure, and reviewed safety protocols. Paul was eager to get in the water. Despite the risks, this was what he lived for. Being face-to-face with one of the ocean's most formidable predators. By noon, the team had anchored near a drop-off point where the water depth plunged dramatically. Paul donned his wetsuit and oxygen tank while Jenna and Evan prepped the bait drum. Reinforced with steel bars, the cage was slowly lowered into the water. Everything was routine. Paul climbed inside, gave the team a thumbs up, and they began the descent. The water was clear and the visibility was better than expected. As Paul adjusted to the depth, the familiar silence of the ocean surrounded him. He scanned the area, waiting for movement. Schools of fish darted past, uninterested in his presence. The bait drum was secured outside the cage, releasing small amounts of chum into the water. It didn't take long for the first shark to appear. A shadow emerged from the distance, slow and deliberate. The great white was massive, at least 18 feet, its body moving with an unsettling ease. Paul's pulse quickened, not out of fear but excitement. He watched as the shark circled the cage, its dark eyes locked onto him rather than the bait. This was unusual. Typically, the sharks went for the easy targets, but this one seemed indifferent to the fish remains drifting through the water. It was watching him. The shark made a slow pass, moving closer than expected. Paul steadied himself, gripping the cage's bars as it glided by, its body just inches away. Then it disappeared into the blue, vanishing for what felt like minutes. Paul exhaled, relaxing slightly. Then, without warning, the shark returned, this time with force. It rammed into the cage, the impact so strong that Paul's grip slipped. The entire structure shook. The steel bars groaned under the pressure. Paul's breathing quickened. This wasn't normal behavior. He had been in cage dives before and had seen sharks become curious, even aggressive. But this was different. This was calculated. Another hit, harder. The top of the cage bent inward slightly. Paul tried to steady himself by gripping the side. But before he could react, the shark charged again. A sickening crunch echoed through the water. A bar snapped loose and the top of the cage was no longer secure. From the surface, Evan and Jenna saw the cage shudder violently. Ryan grabbed the winch controls, ready to pull Paul up. But the shark struck again before he could. The impact sent the cage tilting to one side, the opening now wide enough for something to get inside or for Paul to fall out. Underwater, Paul knew he was in trouble. He tried to stabilize himself, but the motion of the cage had left him unbalanced. The shark was already coming back. In a split second, it rammed forward, its massive head forcing through the damaged section of the cage. Paul had no choice. He had to get out. He pushed off the bars and kicked upward, escaping as the shark entered. But now, he was exposed. There was no barrier between him and the predator. Paul swam toward the surface, kicking as hard as he could. Blood from his scraped arm drifted into the water, a dangerous sign. He knew the moment the shark caught the scent, it would come after him. He was only halfway up when he felt it, a force, sudden and unforgiving. The shark's jaws clamped down on his leg. Pain unlike anything he had ever known shot through his body. The pressure was crushing. He thrashed, desperate to break free, but the shark shook its head, pulling him downward. Blood clouded the water around him. His vision blurred. He knew he was losing too much blood, too fast. On the boat, the crew saw the red billowing through the water. Ryan was already diving in, knife in hand, but he was too far. Paul's body twitched as the shark bit down again, severing muscle and bone. His oxygen regulator slipped from his mouth. His movement slowed. The last thing Paul saw before everything faded was the shadow of the great white circling him one final time. By the time Ryan reached him, there was nothing left to save. The team pulled Paul's lifeless body onto the deck, his wetsuit shredded, his face pale. The shark had vanished. The ocean had taken him. The research expedition ended that day, but the impact of Paul's death rippled through the scientific community. The cage had been reinforced. The safety protocols had been followed, but none of it had mattered. The ocean didn't play by human rules. And on that day, in the deep waters off Stewart Island, the great white had reminded them who truly ruled the sea. The ocean had always called to Sarah Whitman. Growing up in Arizona, she had only seen the waves in pictures and videos, but something about them fascinated her. When she finally got the chance to visit California, She signed up for a week-long surf camp in Santa Cruz without hesitation. She wanted to experience the thrill of riding a wave and feel the ocean's power beneath her. It was supposed to be an adventure, a break from routine. She never imagined that the water she had dreamed about for so long would be where her life would end. On July 22, 2015, the Pacific Wave Surf Camp was alive with energy. The instructors set up their boards along the sand while students gathered for the morning briefing. The air smelled of salt, sunscreen, and excitement. Sarah had been at the camp for 2 days, slowly building her skills. She had fallen more times than she stood on her board, making her more determined. Mark Jensen, the head instructor, had been leading surf lessons in Santa Cruz for over a decade. He had seen many students, some who caught on quickly and others who needed more time. Sarah was somewhere in between, but what she lacked in skill, she made up for in enthusiasm. Mark watched as she practiced pop-ups on the sand, her face set with determination. He reminded the group to stay within the safe zone near the shore. The waters beyond were unpredictable, and sharks had been sighted before, but Sarah barely paid attention to the warnings. She had been waiting for this moment for too long. As the lesson began, the group paddled out to where the waves were breaking gently. Sarah caught a small wave and rode it briefly before tumbling into the water. She surfaced laughing, shaking the salt water from her eyes. Catching even a short ride was exhilarating, but after an hour of practice, she wanted more. Without telling anyone, she paddled farther out. The waves were bigger here, rolling in perfect sets. Her heart pounded with excitement. She watched the other surfers in the distance, waiting for the right moment to go for another ride. The water was darker out here, and the ocean floor was no longer visible. Mark noticed her just as she positioned herself for a wave. He shouted her name, waving for her to return, but she didn't hear him. She was too focused, too eager to prove herself. Then, without warning, the ocean shifted. The movement was subtle at first, just a ripple beneath the surface. Then a shadow appeared. Sarah felt it before she saw it. A sudden shift in the water, an unnatural stillness, and the unmistakable weight of something massive moving beneath her. Her instincts told her to paddle back, but the water exploded around her before she could. The great white shark struck with brutal force. Its jaws clamped down on her leg, dragging her off her board in an instant. The pain was immediate, searing through her body as the shark shook her violently. The surfboard shot into the air, spinning before crashing back down. When Mark saw the attack from the shore, his stomach dropped. He had seen sharks before and heard of attacks, but never this close. Never to one of his students. He grabbed a rescue board and launched into the water, paddling faster than ever. Sarah thrashed, trying to free herself, but the shark's grip was too strong. Blood clouded the water around her, mixing with the foam of the waves. She barely had time to scream before the shark pulled her under. Unaware of what had happened, other surfers were only beginning to react. Some started paddling toward the shore, their eyes wide with fear. Others froze, unsure of what to do. Mark reached the spot where she had disappeared, his heart racing. He scanned the water desperately. Then, for a brief second, he saw her. She was floating just beneath the surface, her eyes open but distant. Her leg was gone. He dove, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward his board. The shark was circling, its powerful body moving through the bloodied water. Mark shouted to the others to get back to shore. He struggled to lift Sarah onto the board, his muscles burning with effort. A wave crashed over them, nearly knocking them both under. He fought against it, holding on to her with everything he had. She was slipping away. He could feel it. When he reached the shore, the others were already calling for help. Lifeguards rushed toward them, their faces pale as they saw Sarah's lifeless body. Once filled with laughter and excitement, the beach had fallen into stunned silence. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. The ocean had given them joy that morning, but it had taken something away by the afternoon. Mark collapsed onto the sand, his chest heaving. He had spent years teaching people to love the ocean, but at that moment, he had never feared it more. Jack Coleman had always felt at home on the ocean. At 42 years old, he had spent more time on the water than on land. Fishing wasn't just a job for him, but a way of life. He had grown up in a small coastal town in Florida, learning the trade from his father, who had taught him everything about reading the water, handling the currents, and understanding the creatures that lurked beneath the surface. The ocean had always provided for him, but he never forgot that it was unpredictable and merciless. On July 14, 2018, Jack set out from a small marina in Nassau, Bahamas, just as the first light of dawn broke across the horizon. He had planned a long solo trip deep into the open waters, nearly 30 miles offshore. These waters were known for their rich marine life, Schools of tuna, mahi-mahi, and marlin roamed freely. It was also an area where oceanic white-tip sharks hunted. Jack knew their presence but had never had a dangerous encounter before. His boat, the Bluefin, was a sturdy 24-foot fishing vessel with everything he needed for a full day on the water. His cooler was packed with ice, his tackle box was fully stocked, and his radio was set to emergency frequencies. He always fished alone. He liked the silence and freedom. There was no one to rely on but himself, and that was how he preferred it. By mid-morning he had reached his destination, an area known as the Pocket, a deep-water trench where fish gathered in massive numbers. He cut the engine and let the boat drift, scanning the water. It was a perfect day for fishing. The surface was calm and the air was warm. He cast his first line and settled in, waiting. An hour passed before he felt the first strong tug. The reel spun wildly as something powerful fought against him. Jack braced himself, his hands firm on the rod, his muscles straining. This was a big one. He worked the reel, pulling, waiting, pulling again. The fight lasted nearly 10 minutes before he finally caught a glimpse of it beneath the surface. A massive yellow-fin tuna, easily over 80 pounds. As Jack pulled it closer to the boat, he noticed a shift in the water. A shadow moved just beneath the surface, and his gut clenched. He had seen this before. Something was watching. Then a dorsal fin slowly and deliberately cut through the water. It was an oceanic white-tip shark. Jack knew these sharks were different. Unlike great whites, who were cautious hunters, white tips were aggressive and relentless. They were known to attack anything that moved, even boats. He had heard the stories from other fishermen. Boats damaged, divers harassed, men lost at sea. The oceanic white tip was a scavenger, but it was also an opportunist. And Jack had just given it an opportunity. He tried to haul the tuna in faster, but the shark had already locked in on its target. With terrifying speed, it lunged, its powerful jaws snapping down on the fish. The force nearly ripped the rod from Jack's hands. He held on, but the shark was too strong. It thrashed violently, tearing into the tuna, sending blood into the water. Then it turned toward Jack. Before he could react, the shark lunged again, but this time it missed the fish and clamped down on Jack's forearm. A bolt of pain shot through him as the teeth sliced through flesh and muscle. The force yanked him forward, his chest slamming into the side of the boat. His grip failed. He was pulled overboard. Cold water swallowed him as he plunged beneath the surface. Panic set in immediately. He kicked hard, his body twisting as he tried to surface. His lungs burned for air. When he finally broke through, gasping, he saw his boat just a few feet away, but the shark was closer. Blood poured from his arm, clouding the water. He knew what that meant. More sharks could come. He had seconds, maybe less, before the white tip struck again. Jack forced his body to move, kicking hard, ignoring the pain. The salt water seared his open wound, but he couldn't stop. His good arm reached for the side of the boat, fingers scraping against the metal. He gripped the edge, trying to pull himself up, but the slick surface made it nearly impossible. Then the second strike came. The impact was like being hit by a truck. The shark rammed into him from below, jaws snapping around his ribs. The pain was unbearable. Jack screamed, but the ocean swallowed the sound. The shark dragged him under again. Instinct took over. Jack thrashed, his free hand punching at the shark's snout. He had heard that was the weak spot. His fist connected, and for a brief moment the predator released him. He surged upward, breaking the surface once more. His vision blurred. Blood loss was taking its toll. His strength was draining. He reached the boat again, using every last ounce of energy to pull himself onto the deck. His body collapsed against the wood, his breath ragged. The shark was still there. It circled beneath the boat, its massive form cutting through the water. Jack could see the deep gashes along his side, the torn flesh on his arm. He was bleeding out. With trembling fingers, he fumbled for the radio. His voice barely came out, weak and broken, but he called for help. The response was faint, distant. He wasn't sure they had heard him. His body felt cold. His mind drifted. The last thing he saw was the sky above him, the boat rocking beneath him. Then everything went black. When the rescue team arrived an hour later, the Bluefin was still adrift. The radio crackled with unanswered calls. The deck was smeared with blood. Jack was gone. The only thing left was the silence of the open ocean. The morning of August 14, 2023, was perfect for a day on the ocean. The sky was a cloudless blue, and the Pacific stretched endlessly along the California coast near Santa Barbara. Alex Mitchell, a 29-year-old adventure enthusiast, had taken the day off work to indulge in one of his favorite pastimes, jet skiing. A regular in the area, he was no stranger to these waters and knew them well. As Alex sped across the rolling waves, the salty spray hitting his face, he felt an exhilarating sense of freedom. The jet ski hummed beneath him, slicing through the water with ease. A few other boats and jet skiers were visible in the distance, but he had ventured farther offshore, eager to push the machine to its limits. Without warning, the calm was shattered. A sudden impact violently rocked the jet ski, throwing Alex forward. His hands lost grip on the handlebars and he splashed into the water. Disoriented, he surfaced, gasping for air. His jet ski floated a few feet away, but his attention was drawn to a massive shape looming beneath the surface. A 15-foot great white shark had appeared, its powerful body cutting through the water like a torpedo. It had struck the jet ski with force, likely mistaking it for prey. Heart-pounding, Alex swam toward his vehicle, but the shark surfaced before he could reach it. The creature's sheer size was staggering. Its dark eyes locked onto him, its dorsal fins slicing through the water ominously. The shark lunged, its massive jaws snapping just inches from Alex's legs. Kicking furiously, he tried to back away, but the predator was relentless. It circled him, its sleek body moving effortlessly beneath the surface before making another pass. This time it struck, its teeth tearing into Alex's lower leg. A sharp, searing pain exploded through his body as he screamed, his blood instantly tainting the water around him. Desperation took hold. Ignoring the agony, Alex thrashed, trying to break free. Miraculously, the shark released him, perhaps startled by his violent movements. Seizing the opportunity, he clawed his way back toward the jet ski. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through his leg, but adrenaline kept him going. He managed to pull himself halfway onto the vehicle, his fingers fumbling to start the engine. The shark wasn't done. It made another pass, its massive body brushing against the jet ski, nearly flipping it. Alex punched the ignition button repeatedly, willing the engine to start. Just as the shark circled back for what could have been the final strike, the engine roared to life. He yanked the throttle with one last burst of strength, sending the jet ski surging forward. The predator pursued him for a few seconds, its dorsal fin cutting through the water behind him. But as the distance between them grew, the shark finally lost interest, disappearing back into the depths. Bleeding and barely able to keep control of his vehicle, Alex sped toward the nearest shoreline. His vision blurred, his body weakened from the blood loss, but he pushed forward. Other boaters had witnessed the attack and were already heading in his direction. By the time he reached the beach, a small crowd had gathered. A few bystanders rushed to help, using towels to wrap his wounded leg while someone called for emergency responders. The gash was deep, the muscle torn, but miraculously, no arteries had been severed. Paramedics arrived minutes later, stabilizing him before rushing him to the hospital. The news spread quickly. Shark attacks, though rare, had been increasing along the California coast, prompting local officials to issue warnings to swimmers and water sports enthusiasts. Marine biologists speculated that warming ocean temperatures and shifting prey populations might draw sharks closer to shore. After undergoing surgery, Alex faced a long recovery. The experience had shaken him to his core. He had always respected the ocean, but now the thought of venturing back out filled him with unease. Yet despite the trauma, he found himself grateful. Grateful to be alive and to have escaped a predator that had ruled the seas for millions of years. Months later, with his leg healed but scarred, he finally returned to the water. This time he was more cautious, more aware. The thrill of jet skiing would never be the same, but he refused to let fear dictate his life. The unpredictable and powerful ocean had nearly claimed him, but it hadn't won, and that, he decided, was enough. As Alex recovered, he became fascinated by sharks and spent countless hours researching their behavior. What had once been a creature of nightmares turned into an obsession. He spoke to marine biologists, read studies, and even watched documentaries on shark behavior. What he learned surprised him. Most attacks were cases of mistaken identity. The idea of a shark deliberately hunting humans was largely a myth. This knowledge, though comforting, did little to erase the raw terror he had felt that day. His newfound curiosity led him to contact shark conservationists. He was invited to visit a research facility where scientists studied great whites. Seeing these massive creatures from the safety of a boat was different from being in the water with one. Watching them glide beneath the surface with such grace and power filled him with awe. He realized that in some strange way, he had developed a deep respect for the predator that had nearly killed him. Alex wanted to return to the ocean despite his trauma to conquer his fear and educate others. He started a blog documenting his experience, sharing his recovery journey, and promoting shark awareness. His story gained traction, and soon he was invited to speak at events and schools, warning people about the dangers while dispelling common misconceptions about sharks. 1 year after the attack, he decided to return to the exact location where it had happened. He rented a jet ski and ventured cautiously into the waters off Santa Barbara. His heart pounded as he cut through the waves, every ripple reminding him of the horror he had survived. But this time he was prepared. He stayed closer to shore, kept an emergency whistle on hand, and remained hyper-aware of his surroundings. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled him. The attack had changed him in ways he never expected. What had once been a passion for adrenaline and adventure had become a mission to understand the ocean better. He was no longer just a thrill seeker. He was an advocate for marine conservation. While he still bore the scars of that day, they served as reminders of his survival, resilience, and deep respect for the sea. The ocean had tested him, but he had emerged stronger, wiser, and determined to make a difference. The waters off the coast of Hawaii shimmered beneath the midday sun on September 3, 2017. A group of divers, led by an experienced instructor, had set out on a recreational dive near the deepwater reefs off Oahu's southern coast. Among them was 28-year-old Sarah Lewis, a marine enthusiast and avid diver who had traveled from California to explore the vibrant underwater world of the Pacific. Sarah had spent years diving in various locations, but Hawaii's waters had always captivated her. The promise of encountering majestic marine life, from sea turtles to reef sharks, drew her to this expedition. The dive site was about 15 miles offshore, known for its dramatic coral formations and abundant fish life. The boat rocked gently as the divers made their final equipment checks before descending into the clear blue abyss. As they explored the reef, schools of colorful fish darted through the coral, and the occasional moray eel peered out from its rocky hideaway. The group moved in a slow, controlled rhythm, following the instructor as they marveled at the breathtaking scenery. Sarah, trailing slightly behind, took her time absorbing every detail, her camera capturing the vibrant marine life. About 30 minutes into the dive, a shadow passed overhead. At first it was subtle, just a flicker in the periphery. Sarah turned, her heart skipping a beat as she spotted the unmistakable silhouette of a large oceanic white-tip shark gliding effortlessly through the water. The predator moved with a casual, almost lazy grace, its long wing-like pectoral fins giving it an unmistakable presence. White tips are known for their boldness, particularly in open water, and this one was no exception. It circled the divers at a distance, curious but non-threatening. The instructor signaled for the group to remain calm and stay close together. They had encountered sharks before. In most cases, the animals would lose interest and move on, but this one lingered. Sarah tried to steady her breathing, her pulse hammering in her ears. The shark made a slow, deliberate pass, coming within 10 feet before veering off again. Its movements were calculated, assessing the unfamiliar intruders in its domain. Then, in a sudden shift, it turned more aggressively, closing the distance with unsettling speed. The instructor waved his arms, attempting to appear larger, while another diver extended their camera pole to deter the shark. Sarah instinctively backed away, but as she did, the shark lunged. It happened in an instant. An explosion of movement as the powerful predator snapped its jaws around her leg, sinking its teeth deep into her wetsuit and flesh. A sharp, searing pain shot through her as the shark's grip tightened. The water churned red. Sarah struggled, kicking wildly as the others moved into action. One of the divers jabbed at the shark with their camera pole, striking it near the gills. The predator released its grip, twisting away and vanishing into the blue almost as quickly as it had attacked. Disoriented and in agony, Sarah fought to maintain control. Her leg throbbed, the wound deep but not life-threatening. The instructor grabbed her arm, helping her stabilize as the group began their emergency ascent. The once serene dive had turned into a desperate race against time. Breaking the surface, the divers waved frantically at the boat crew. Within seconds, they were hauling Sarah aboard, pressing towels against her bleeding leg. The bite marks were deep, the flesh torn, but the bleeding, though alarming, was manageable. A distress call was sent, and a rescue team was en route within minutes. As the boat sped back toward the shore, Sarah lay on the deck, her face pale but composed. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, dulling the pain, but the reality of what had just happened was sinking in. She had always understood the risks of diving, but facing the raw power of a predator firsthand was an entirely different experience. Doctors cleaned and stitched her wounds at the hospital, monitoring for infection. Despite the severity of the bite, no major arteries or tendons had been severed, sparing her from permanent damage. The incident made headlines, with experts weighing in on the shark's unusual aggression. Some speculated that increased fishing in the area had disrupted natural feeding patterns, making the predator bolder in its search for food. In the weeks that followed, Sarah struggled with the psychological impact of the attack. Once a place of wonder, the ocean now held an edge of fear. But as time passed, she found herself drawn back to it. Determined not to let fear define her, she slowly returned to diving, first in controlled environments, then back in the open sea. A year after the attack, she found herself once again off the coast of Hawaii, standing on the deck of a dive boat. The memory of that day was still vivid, but this time she felt different, stronger, wiser. As she descended into the blue depths, she carried the scars on her leg and a newfound respect for the unpredictable, untamed world beneath the waves. The waters off the coast of Western Australia were unusually still on the evening of November 9, 2018. A four-person Coast Guard crew patrolled a stretch of ocean near Rottnest Island, responding to a distress call from a stranded fishing vessel. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with hues of orange and purple. The crew, led by Lieutenant Mark Calloway, had been navigating these waters for years. To them, it was just another routine mission. Their rigid-hull inflatable boat effortlessly sliced through the water as they neared the location of the distress signal. The stranded fishermen were visible in the distance, their small boat bobbing in the gentle waves. The Coast Guard was preparing to pull alongside them when something massive disturbed the water behind them. A 14-foot great white shark had appeared out of the depths, its enormous silhouette barely visible in the fading light. At first it circled at a distance, its dorsal fin cutting through the water like a blade. The crew had seen sharks before. Western Australia was known for them, but they rarely paid much attention. That changed when the shark suddenly changed course and headed straight for them. Without warning, the predator slammed into the side of the boat with tremendous force, sending a shudder through the hull. Lieutenant Calloway and his crew barely had time to react before the shark struck again, biting into the inflatable portion of the boat. A sharp hissing sound filled the air as the pressurized air chamber rapidly deflated. The vessel lurched, nearly sending one of the crew members overboard. Panic surged through the crew. Coast Guard boats were built for durability, but not to endure a direct assault from a massive predator. The shark, showing no sign of retreat, circled just a few yards away before turning to charge again. Calloway reached for the emergency radio, his hands steady despite the rising tension. He reported their dire situation. An aggressive great white was actively attacking the vessel. The hull had been compromised and they needed immediate assistance. As the radio crackled with a response from their base, the shark lunged again. This time, it leaped partially out of the water, its powerful body slamming into the side of the boat. The impact sent two crew members sprawling, their gear scattering across the deck. The boat rocked violently, dangerously close to capsizing. The fishermen in the stranded vessel watched in horror from a safe distance, powerless to assist. One of the crew members, Petty Officer Lucas Haynes, instinctively reached for a wooden baton to push debris away from the hull. As the shark circled back, he slammed the baton against the water, hoping to deter it. The great white hesitated, its predatory instincts briefly interrupted, but the moment of reprieve didn't last. The shark lunged once more, jaws snapping dangerously close to the motor at the stern of the boat. If it damaged the engine, they would be left adrift, unable to maneuver to safety. Realizing this, Calloway made the quick decision to accelerate. The boat lurched forward, creating a wake that momentarily confused the predator. The shark followed, its dark form gliding through the churning water, but the Coast Guard vessel managed to distance itself. After several tense minutes, the shark finally relinquished the pursuit, disappearing into the deep. The crew, shaken but unharmed, took a moment to assess the damage. The inflatable side had been punctured in multiple places, leaving the boat partially deflated. They had no choice but to call for backup and limp back toward shore at reduced speed, staying close to the stranded fisherman's boat until another Coast Guard vessel arrived. By the time they reached the dock, word of the attack had already spread. Experts speculated on the shark's unusual aggression, Some believed it had mistaken the boat for a wounded whale, while others suggested territorial behavior. Regardless of the reason, it was a rare and harrowing encounter that none of the crew would forget. Though rattled, Lieutenant Calloway and his team returned to duty the next day. Their job, after all, was to patrol the unpredictable ocean, where the line between routine and danger could blur instantly. The Great White had left its mark, not just on their boat, but on their understanding of the raw power that lurked beneath the waves. The incident sparked a wave of discussions among marine experts, conservationists, and the general public about the complex dynamics between sharks and humans in open waters. Researchers, particularly those focused on apex predator behavior, found the event both alarming and fascinating. Several teams launched in-depth studies to analyze the migratory patterns and behavioral shifts of great white sharks in the region, seeking to understand whether rising sea temperatures, shifts in prey availability, or increased human activity had triggered a change in the animal's natural temperament. Their findings could potentially reshape long-standing assumptions about shark aggression and territorial instincts. Meanwhile, the local maritime authorities took swift action, reviewing their safety protocols comprehensively. The attack prompted urgent conversations about the structural resilience of smaller patrol vessels, especially those frequently operating in waters that are habitats for large marine predators. Engineers and naval architects were consulted to explore reinforced hull designs and implement additional safety measures to protect crews during unexpected encounters with wildlife. As for Captain Calloway and his crew, the memory of that day remained etched into their minds. They would recount the harrowing experience with a blend of reverence and unease, haunted by the raw power of the creature that had collided with their vessel, yet captivated by the rare glimpse into nature's untamed ferocity. The attack became more than just a frightening event. It was a sobering reminder that no matter how seasoned or prepared, even the most experienced seafarers are ultimately guests in a vast, unpredictable wilderness, where the rules are dictated not by man, but by the deep. The bright Bahamian sun, the ocean was a vast and uncaring expanse that extended in all directions. The oceanic white-tip shark, a species notorious for its audacity and predatory tendencies, had long been found in large numbers in the waters close to Cat Island in 2014. Although the island itself was small, hardly more than a dot on a map, it was one of the last real frontiers for seasoned divers to see large pelagic sharks in the open ocean. Sarah Denslow and her husband, Tom Renwick, had been diving in different places for years in an attempt to experience the excitement of seeing the top predators in the ocean in their natural environment. Tom, a diving instructor, had an unquenchable thirst for adventure, while Sarah, an enthusiastic underwater photographer, had always been captivated by the mystery of the deep. Months of preparation went into this specific expedition, which was a well-timed trip to see the white tips that hauntingly and confidently patrolled the deep blue. Their tiny charter boat moored miles out from the coast rocked gently in the swell. Ellis McTeague, the seasoned captain, had spent decades negotiating these waters. He respected the ocean's unpredictable nature, because he had witnessed both its calmest and most violent moments. He reminded them that reef sharks and oceanic whitetips were not the same. They could quickly shift from curiosity to aggression, and were opportunistic and unrelenting. Tom and Sarah stepped into the water, which was glistening with reflected light. There was nothing but the weightless sensation of floating between worlds as they looked down into an endless abyss of blue. Lucas Dane, their guide, had already gone under the water and was looking about. He was the type of diver who had developed a sixth sense for behavioral shifts over years of practice. In just a few minutes, the first shark showed up. It was at least 8 feet long, and it approached them with eerily slow, methodical movements. Whitetips were distinguished by their oversized pectoral fins, which gave them the appearance of wings as they glided through the water. After circling far away to assess them, the shark vanished into the ocean. As she waited for another approach, Sarah made adjustments to her camera. Her fingers automatically shifted over the controls, focusing and framing the image. After years of practice, it became a habit. Tom moved with precision and control as he hovered a few feet away, looking around the water. The second shark then arrived. This one behaved differently despite being somewhat smaller. It moved more quickly and purposefully cut through the water. Lucas gave them a signal to remain near one another. This shark's movement seemed strange for some reason. As it moved in increasingly tighter loops around them, Sarah angled her camera in its direction. These predators were not easily startled, in contrast to reef sharks, which had a tendency to dart in and out. They were known to hunt shipwreck survivors down one by one over the course of days due to their persistence. She observed that the shark's posture had changed. Its tail was undulating more forcefully, and its pectoral fins had lowered slightly. It was no longer interesting. They were being tested. Despite being just a short swim away, the distance between them and the boat seemed enormous. When she turned to signal Tom, the attack started before she could finish the motion. With frightful speed, the shark struck, bringing them closer together in an instant. Sarah experienced a tremendous force struck her leg, followed by intense pain as she was jerked downward. The world around her burst into motion with water churning with a mixture of blood and air bubbles. It was a dizzying experience, a violent change from floating calm to a valiant fight against an invisible power. Instinctively, Tom rushed toward her, reaching for her arm while his heart raced. In an attempt to pull her back, he grabbed hold, but the shark twisted and thrashed viciously. Everything was obscured by the red clouding of the water. He sensed Sarah's attempts to kick and struggle, but the animal's strength was too great. The shark was unrelenting, but Lucas was already approaching them with a spear gun. It briefly let go of Sarah before lunging once more and clamping down on her side this time. The sound of bones breaking was a deep guttural sound that echoed through the water. Tom was horrified to see how Sarah's movements weakened. With her camera still fastened to her wrist, Sarah's now still body floated downward, its lens capturing only the void of the abyss. Tom's mind was stuck, unable to comprehend what had just transpired. Lucas caught hold of him and pulled him to the surface. With a gasp, they emerged into the atmosphere. The captain of the nearby boat was yelling something, but it didn't register. Tom turned back, looking at the water as soon as he was dragged aboard. There was nothing, though. Sarah was nowhere to be seen. The shark was not there. The days that followed were marked by a haze of Coast Guard searches, unresolved inquiries, and a heartbreaking, hollow sadness. According to the authorities, white tips have carried out numerous attacks throughout history, and often prey on victims of shipwrecks. While their predatory tendencies were well known, witnessing it up close was a completely different experience. The image of Sarah being drawn into the depths, her eyes wide with pain and terror, was too vivid for Tom to forget. He was aware that the ocean had its own laws and did not act maliciously or intentionally, but the sense of powerlessness was intolerable. He believed he understood the dangers of the water, having spent his entire life in it. But this experience served as a reminder that people were only temporary visitors to this world. Years later, Tom would hesitate before answering when asked if he still went diving. Though he never ventured into open water, he continued to dive. The memory lingered, and the vast blue abyss had become a haunting reminder of that moment. Somewhere, deep off Cat Island, a silent hunter, the oceanic white-tip, still prowled the depths. The great white shark capital of the world, Gansbai, South Africa, is a seaside town that has long attracted adventurers seeking cage diving opportunities. However, on March 8, 2001, a banana boat ride ended in carnage, turning the ocean's allure into a nightmare. 9 people were killed in the attack, making it one of the deadliest shark-related events in contemporary history. The waves shimmered under the warm African sun on that sunny morning. There were no indications of danger lurking beneath the calm ocean. The group of 12 tourists, consisting of 9 adults and 3 children, gathered at the dock, excited to take a ride across the bay on the banana boat. The travelers, whose names were unknown to one another just hours before, came from all over the world, united by a shared desire for adventure. Leading the group was Othniel Kraus, a seasoned water sports instructor with over 10 years of experience. With a deep tan from years of sailing and a tough demeanor, he assured the visitors they would be safe before the ride began. As laughter erupted, the banana boat, a bright yellow inflatable tube towed by a speedboat, bounced playfully on the waves. For almost 20 minutes, the ride was pure enjoyment. The kids, Tobias Grimm, age 11, Esme Callow, age 10, and her younger brother, Oliver Callow, age 8, screamed with delight while clinging to the boat's handles. Adult attendees included German architect Matteo Lang, Canadian educator Shiloh Brantley, and an Indian couple celebrating their anniversary, Rohan and Amara Deshmukh. Other passengers included a retired professor from France, Viggo Moreau, and two Swedish siblings, Astrid and Leif Jansson. The final member of the group was British journalist Eleanor Webb, who had come to document the experience for an upcoming travel piece. Then, the water below them suddenly turned dark. As the speedboat's pilot Othniel noticed the change, it was too late. A huge shadow moved at a terrifyingly fast pace. The estimated 16-foot-long great white shark erupted from the depths before anyone could react. In a single destructive blow, its jaws, lined with razor-sharp teeth, clamped down on the inflatable boat with tremendous force, tearing it apart. All 12 people fell into the water as the boat abruptly lost its air. Laughter was replaced by screams. The shark, frenzied by the sudden movement, began to thrash through the waves, causing chaos. Using his radio, Othniel called for help and tossed a life preserver toward the struggling survivors while still on the speedboat. However, rescue would require valuable time that the group lacked. Once more, the shark struck. Before launching itself at the nearest target, it made a precise, calculated circle. The first victim, Matteo Lang, was confused after the fall. In an instant, the bite force pulled him under, and blood appeared on the surface. Panic struck. The shark's tail whipped through the water, diverting Shiloh Brantley and Amara Deshmukh from their intended course as they tried to swim toward the speedboat. It turned around with its mouth agape. Shiloh was the next to be dragged down in a violent spiral. Amara kicked wildly in an attempt to escape, but the predator reappeared and struck her with its enormous body, sending her under the waves. The kids clung to Astrid Jansson, who tried to keep them afloat despite her fear. Leif Jansson made an effort to repel the shark, but it grabbed hold of him and vanished beneath the surface. Before the shark even reached him, Viggo Moreau, who had been fighting to stay above the water, gave in to exhaustion and sank. When Rohan Deshmukh lost sight of his wife, he attempted to save Tobias Grimm, but they were both swept under by another swift attack. Eleanor Webb struggled against the churning waves, but the shark came for her next, sealing her fate. 9 people had died in a matter of minutes. Othniel's distress call alerted another boat, which arrived just as the remaining 3, Astrid Jansson, Esme Callow, and Oliver Callow, were about to capsize. The survivors were quickly dragged aboard by a group of local fishermen under the direction of Hendrik van Ziel. After its hunger was satisfied, the shark eventually withdrew into the depths, possibly put off by the sound of the engines. Gansby, the town, was in shock in the aftermath. Banana boat rides were immediately prohibited by the local government, which also stepped up patrols along the shore. Experts argued on the cause of the attack, with some speculating that the shark's increased hunting aggression was a result of overfishing. Others believed it was just a tragic encounter, a case of misidentification made worse by the frantic splashing. The survivors found it difficult to cope with the trauma. The sight of the sea was too much for Astrid Jansson, who had once loved the ocean. Esme and Oliver Callow bore both psychological and physical scars, but they were too young to fully comprehend the horror. Unable to shake the memories of the people he couldn't save, Othniel Kraus quit the water sports industry entirely due to his guilt. A somber milestone in Gansby's history was reached on March 8, 2001, an unforgiving reminder of the ocean's unpredictability. What started as a carefree day turned into an unimaginable tragedy. The survivors carried the burden of that day with them, forever altered by the ruthless depths, even as time passed. Investigations into the attack continued despite the initial shock. Despite searching the area, marine biologists were unable to identify the specific shark involved. Theories circulated suggesting that shark behavior may have changed due to environmental shifts. It was possible that the great white shark's increased hunting behavior was influenced by habitat destruction, climate change, and food scarcity. According to some experts, the waters had become overcrowded, disrupting natural hunting patterns, which they blamed on increased human activity in the area. News interviews featured survivors telling their stories, their voices shaking with emotion. Months later, Astrid Jansson, speaking from her Swedish home, described the attack as a nightmare. After losing their son, Esme and Oliver Callow's parents pushed for stricter safety rules on water activities for tourists. The youngest survivor, Oliver, refused to speak about what had happened, while Esme struggled with nightmares and anxiety. As time went on, The victims were honored with memorial services. Where their loved ones had been lost, families gathered at the attack site and threw flowers into the waves. A memorial plaque near the harbor bears the names of the departed, serving as a somber reminder of the cost of interacting with nature. Some locals, whose livelihoods depended on fishing and tourism, persisted in going out into the waters despite the tragedy. However, the fear lingered. After the massacre, rumors of the ghost shark of Gansby circulated, an invisible predator that had disappeared into the ocean. Its enormous shadow served as a reminder of what had happened, and some fishermen swore they had seen it lurking beneath their boats. The ocean was full of wonder and adventure, but it also carried countless risks. Those who had witnessed the atrocities of that day would never perceive the waves the same way again. As Kelly Wexler navigated her sleek blue kayak through the mild morning swells off the coast of Monterey, California, she could see the Pacific Ocean stretching in all directions. The air was crisp with the smell of kelp and salt in September 2010. Kayakers and wildlife lovers had long found refuge in the region, which was well known for its rocky cliffs and plethora of marine life. But it was also a hunting ground for the great white shark, one of the most dangerous predators in the ocean. Kelly, 42, was a Sacramento-based educator who had traveled to Monterey for a much-needed weekend getaway. She had always been drawn to the sea, and the waves' steady rise and fall gave her comfort. With the exception of the occasional ripple from a fish swimming beneath the surface, the water was glassy and undisturbed in the calm morning. Maintaining a comfortable distance from the kelp beds, where sea otters were floating languidly on their backs, she paddled steadily. She stopped to admire the view a few hundred yards off the coast. The morning mist was lifting, revealing the rugged beauty of the coastline. A group of harbor seals rested on a nearby rock, outcropping their sleek bodies glistening in the early sunlight. She was soothed into a state of calm by the moment's tranquility. However, beneath the surface, a massive creature was moving precisely and deliberately. Suddenly, a force powerful enough to lift her kayak partially out of the water struck its underside. Kelly barely had time to react before she was pitched sideways, her paddle torn from her grasp as the kayak flipped. Cold water enveloped her, shocking her system as she struggled to orient herself. Panic surged through her veins, but before she could regain control, she saw it, a monstrous great white shark at least 14 feet long, its gray silhouette cutting through the water like a torpedo. The shark came back around, its massive head breaching the surface as it bit down on the kayak, crunching through the fiberglass as if it were nothing more than a toy. The force of its jaws sent vibrations through the water, and Kelly instinctively kicked away from the sinking remains of her vessel. Adrenaline sharpened her instincts, but nothing could prepare her for what happened next. A sudden searing pain shot through her leg. The shark's teeth had clamped onto her calf, its serrated edges digging deep into muscle and bone. A primal scream ripped from her throat as she thrashed wildly, desperate to free herself. The water around her turned a murky red, the iron scent of blood mixing with the salt. The predator shook its head, testing its hold, but at that moment, Kelly's survival instincts took over. The only weak point on the shark's otherwise armored body was its snout, so she used everything she had to drive her free foot against it. Though it wasn't much, the impact was sufficient. The shark suddenly let go of her, its black eyes unblinking as it vanished into the ocean. Kelly didn't hold off on seeing if it would come back. Breathing heavily, she looked around her. Her kayak was destroyed. Blood continued to leak from her leg, attracting smaller fish that darted nervously around her. She had to quickly leave the water. She was lucky that a fishing boat had heard her screams from about 50 yards away. A seasoned fisherman named Byron Trumbull, who had spent the majority of his life navigating these waters, was in charge of the ship. An ancient but reliable craft named Salty Dog. The distinct cries of distress were heard while he and his wiry deckhand, Vince Lafferty, were hauling in nets. Byron didn't take long. As Vince grasped a life ring, he sped up the engine and headed for the struggling kayaker. Kelly's strength diminished as they got closer and her face turned pale. Her blood loss was concerning, and she struggled to stay afloat while breathing raggedly. Kelly grabbed on with her remaining strength as Vince tossed the ring with perfect timing. It was not an easy task to bring her on board. Her body shook violently from shock and hypothermia, and her leg had deep gashes. As Vince radioed for assistance, Byron snatched up a towel and pressed it firmly against the wounds to stop the bleeding. They were directed to a nearby marina where an ambulance would be waiting by the Coast Guard, who arrived at once. For Kelly, the ride back was a blur. She was in pain and tired, and the world was swaying around her. She was kept awake by Byron's steady voice, which assured her that everything would be fine. Vince, meanwhile, watched the water, half thinking the shark would follow them because of the blood's lingering smell. They arrived at the dock to find emergency personnel already there. Kelly's eyes were still bright, but her face was pale as she was hoisted onto a stretcher. Before hurrying her to the hospital, the paramedics quickly stabilized her vitals and gave her fluids. She had survived the shark's terrifyingly close approach to taking her life. Her kayak and the bite patterns were later analyzed by experts who verified that it had been a great white. Marine biologists surmised that the shark might have thought her kayak was a seal, or was just curious, serving as a sobering reminder of how erratic the top predator of the ocean can be. Recuperation took Kelly weeks. Her leg wounds required numerous stitches. She had to attend physical therapy sessions every day. However, the wounds were more than just physical. She had nightmares about the attack for months, and the image of those lifeless black eyes remained ingrained in her mind. Despite the trauma, she resisted letting fear control her life. After a year, she went back to Monterey and watched the waves come in while standing safely on shore. Although she didn't have to, she never went kayaking again. The fact that she survived, something that few people ever did, was sufficient. Byron and Vince, the men who had saved her, remained in contact. Every year on the anniversary of the attack, they exchanged messages, short but meaningful reminders of the day Kelly Wexler faced death and lived to tell the tale. Summer of 2005, a small team of marine researchers docked at the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. The waters surrounding the island were renowned for their deep trenches and thriving shark populations, making it an ideal location for studying oceanic white-tip sharks. Among them was 28-year-old Anna Kessinger, an experienced marine biologist dedicated to shark conservation. She had spent years researching pelagic species, but nothing could have prepared her for what would unfold that fateful afternoon. The team, led by Dr. Halston Drexler, was tasked with deploying long-term monitoring devices to track the migratory patterns of sharks. The expedition had gone smoothly. The weather was clear and the currents mild. By midday, they had reached a deep-water drop-off where the ocean floor disappeared into an abyssal blue. Anna was assigned to descend alone and secure a tracking beacon to a rock formation, a routine task for her. As she submerged, the sunlight fractured against the shifting waves above. She adjusted her buoyancy, careful not to stir the silt that could obscure her vision. Below, the ocean stretched endlessly, an empty void save for the occasional glint of a passing fish. She caught movement in her peripheral vision a few meters from her target. A large, unmistakable shape glided up from the deep. A 10-foot oceanic white-tip shark approached, its broad, rounded fins cutting effortlessly through the water. It moved slowly, inquisitively, but its direct approach made it clear. Anna was an object of interest. She remained still, her heart pounding but her mind sharp, knowing that sudden movements could shift the shark's curiosity into something far more dangerous. White-tips were known for their boldness, often pushing boundaries that other sharks wouldn't dare. The shark circled her, spiraling inward with each pass. Anna needed to work quickly. She reached for the beacon, struggling slightly against the current. The subtle movement was all it took. The shark closed the gap in a swift burst of energy, and before Anna could react, pain shot through her leg. The pressure was immense as the bite clamped just above her ankle, slicing through the wetsuit easily. A cloud of crimson unfurled in the water. Anna thrashed instinctively, trying to free herself. The shark released its grip but did not retreat. Instead, it hovered just beyond reach, its dark eyes locked onto her. She kicked off toward the surface, knowing that a rapid ascent could lead to decompression sickness, but realizing that staying meant certain death. The boat was still quite a distance away when she noticed the shadow of another researcher leaping in her direction. It was Erwin Sade, the team's dive safety officer. He signaled for calm, but Anna was already losing blood at an alarming rate. Before Erwin could get close enough, the white-tip lunged again. Anna spun around, her body whirling from the force of the impact. As shock set in, she hardly noticed the pain. Dr. Drexler and the others watched in horror from above. When the predator struck again and eventually veered away, the ocean churned with red. Irwin arrived, encircling her unconscious body with an arm and kicking forcefully toward the surface. There was no other option, but the climb was too quick. Anna was hauled aboard as soon as they broke the surface. Her leg was a mangled mess of exposed bone and torn muscle. Despite someone applying pressure to the wound, the bleeding was excessive. A distress call went out, and the radio crackled. Drexler searched for a pulse. There was none. By the time the emergency helicopter finally arrived, Anna's body still lay on the deck, her blood seeping into the fiberglass. As they sat in stunned silence, the team felt the full weight of what had just transpired. Historically, oceanic whitetips had attacked people, especially survivors of shipwrecks, but this time was different. This was an experienced researcher in controlled conditions, and yet the shark's persistence had defied all expectations. In the days that followed, experts debated what had triggered the attack. Some suggested that the sudden movement of her struggle had flipped a switch in the shark's predatory instincts. Others believed the white tip had been drawn by the subtle electrical signals emitted by her dive equipment. But theories meant little to those who had been there. The reality was simple. Anna had done everything right, and it still hadn't been enough. The incident cast a long shadow over the research community. The project was suspended indefinitely, and the team members dispersed to different corners of the world. Dr. Drexler later published a report on the dangers of working in remote deep-sea environments, emphasizing that even the most seasoned professionals could fall victim to nature's unpredictability. Irwin left fieldwork altogether, unable to shake the memory of those final moments. Anna's family held a private ceremony in her hometown, Hobart, Australia. Given that she had died doing what she loved, they chose not to demonize the shark. Still, it was a tremendous loss. In the following years, marine biologists used her name as a warning, a sobering reminder that despite its beauty, the ocean remained wild and cruel. The morning of March 5, 2025, was calm along the shores of Monterey Bay, California. The sky was clear, the water was inviting, and 5 friends, Daniel Carter, Emily Lawson, Jason Miller, Olivia Perez, and Marcus Bennett, set out for a swim. They had been planning this trip for weeks, eager to take a break from their busy lives and enjoy the ocean together. None of them knew they were about to make a fatal mistake that would cost all their lives. The group had arrived at the beach just after sunrise. It was a weekday, meaning fewer crowds, making it the perfect time for a peaceful swim. They parked their cars, tossed their towels onto the sand, and stood at the water's edge, feeling the waves lap at their feet. The water was a little chilly, but they were used to it. Monterey Bay, known for its diverse marine life, was home to sea lions, dolphins, and great white sharks. But sharks were rarely a concern for swimmers this close to shore. Attacks were uncommon, and they had all been in the ocean enough times to feel comfortable. Unbeknownst to them, just half a mile offshore, a fishing boat was discarding fish guts and blood into the water. The Ocean's Bounty crew had been out since the early hours, hauling in a large catch of rockfish and halibut. As they cleaned their fish, they tossed the waste overboard. The smell of blood spread quickly through the water, attracting attention from predators below. The 5 friends waded in, laughing as the cold water reached their waists. They swam out farther, enjoying the freedom of the open ocean, completely unaware of the invisible danger surrounding them. The scent of fish remains had traveled through the currents, sending signals to one of the most efficient hunters of the sea, a great white shark. The predator had been lurking in deeper waters when it caught the scent. Measuring over 17 feet long, it was a fully grown adult, capable of launching itself at prey with astonishing speed. It followed the trail, its powerful body slicing through the water as it moved toward the shallows. To the shark, there was no distinction between discarded fish and the 5 swimmers. All it detected was movement and the scent of food. Daniel was the first to notice something was off. He had been floating on his back, eyes closed, when he suddenly felt a shift in the water beneath him. It was subtle, just a change in current, but enough to make him uneasy. He turned to look at the others, who were still chatting, unaware. He opened his mouth to say something, but before the words could leave his lips, the attack happened. Without warning, the water beneath him erupted in a violent burst. A massive force slammed into him, knocking the air from his lungs. A split second later, searing pain shot through his body as the shark's jaws clamped down on his torso. The impact was so sudden and forceful that Daniel had no time to react. One moment he was there. The next, he was being pulled under. The others heard the splash and turned just in time to see the water churn red. Emily screamed. Jason froze, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Olivia and Marcus instinctively started swimming toward shore, but panic set in. The shark was still there, moving swiftly beneath them and circling. Jason barely had time to register the loss of his friend before the predator struck again. The shark came from below, its jaws wide, its eyes black and lifeless. It clamped down on Jason's leg and yanked him beneath the surface. The water exploded in another spray of crimson as Jason's muffled scream was cut short. Emily saw it all happen just a few feet away from her. She turned, frantically paddling toward Olivia and Marcus. But the shark wasn't finished. It came again, its instincts in full attack mode. It lunged at Emily, grabbing her midsection and dragging her down. Her arms thrashed for a moment before she disappeared completely. Olivia and Marcus were the last two left, their strokes wild and desperate. They had made it closer to shore but were still far from safety. Marcus was swimming as fast as he could, his breath ragged, his arms burning from exhaustion. Olivia was right beside him, her eyes wide with terror. The shoreline was getting closer. Then Olivia felt something brush against her leg. Her mind barely had time to process what it was before pain ripped through her. The shark had returned for its fourth victim, grabbing Olivia's leg and pulling her back. She let out a choked scream, reaching for Marcus, but the force was too strong. She was yanked under, her arms flailing for only a few seconds before the water turned dark with her blood. Marcus kept swimming. His lungs burned, and his heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. He could see the beach, sand, and safety ahead. Desperate to escape, he pushed harder, his mind refusing to acknowledge that he was the last one left. Then the shark struck one final time. A sudden, brutal impact knocked the wind out of him. He felt his body twist unnaturally as the shark latched onto his side, shaking him like a rag doll. Pain flooded through him, but it didn't last long. His vision blurred, the world tilted, and then nothing. From the shore, a few early morning beachgoers had seen the commotion. A lifeguard had rushed to grab his rescue board, but it was too late when he made it into the water. The ocean was calm again. The waves rolled in and out as if nothing had happened. There was no sign of the 5 friends. Only the faint stain of red in the water remained, slowly fading as the tide carried it away. By the time rescue boats arrived, there was nothing left to find. The search lasted hours, then days, but the bodies were never recovered. The ocean had taken them. The news of the attack spread quickly, shocking the local community. Shark experts analyzed the incident, pointing to the nearby fishing boat as the likely cause. The discarded fish waste had drawn the predator in, and the swimmers had unknowingly entered its hunting zone. It was a tragic mistake, one that cost 5 lives. A mistake that could never be undone. The sun cast a golden glow over the pristine white sand as Carla Mason and her 15-year-old son Jake stepped onto the private beach of their resort in the Bahamas. It was the morning of July 14, 2022, and their long-anticipated vacation had finally begun. After months of working long hours and juggling responsibilities, Carla had promised Jake a trip they would never forget. With its crystal-clear waters and colorful coral reefs, the Bahamas seemed the perfect place to escape. The island resort where they were staying was bustling with tourists. Families lounged under umbrellas, couples strolled along the shoreline, and children splashed in the gentle waves. The ocean stretched endlessly, shimmering under the bright sun. Carla and Jake had spent their first few days exploring the resort's pools, trying local seafood and taking boat rides. But today was different. They planned to snorkel in the open waters just off the shore. Jake had always been fascinated by marine life. He had spent hours watching documentaries about coral reefs and dreamed of swimming among tropical fish. On the other hand, Carla had always been more cautious about the ocean. She loved the water, but the idea of venturing out into deeper areas made her uneasy. Still, she didn't want to dampen Jake's excitement. She had promised him adventure and was determined to keep that promise. After a light breakfast at the beachside cafe, they reached the small equipment rental hut near the dock. A local guide, Leon Griffith, greeted them with a friendly smile. He handed them their snorkel masks and fins and briefly explained the best spots to explore. He assured them the waters were safe, teeming with harmless marine creatures. Carla listened carefully, taking in every detail, while Jake eagerly adjusted his gear, barely containing his excitement. By late morning, they waded into the warm, shallow waters, swimming further from the crowded beach. Schools of vibrant fish darted around them, weaving through coral formations. The underwater world was breathtaking. Bright blue parrotfish, yellow-striped sergeant majors, and elegant stingrays glided beneath them. Jake swam a few feet ahead, pointing excitedly at a sea turtle that drifted lazily through the water. Carla's initial nervousness faded as she watched her son marvel at the beauty around him. She felt at peace, floating effortlessly in the gentle waves. They had drifted slightly farther than she had intended, but she wasn't too concerned. The water was clear and they could still see the shore not too far away. Then something shifted. The fish that had been swimming so freely moments ago suddenly scattered. A stillness settled over the reef as if the ocean itself had taken a breath. Carla noticed the change but didn't understand what it meant, until she saw the shadow. A sleek, dark figure glided below them, moving slowly and deliberately. Carla's chest tightened. She reached out for Jake, signaling for him to stay still. He turned to her, his eyes questioning. But then he saw it too, a reef shark. It wasn't massive, but it was large enough to be dangerous. Around 6 feet long, its slender body cut through the water effortlessly. Carla had read about these sharks before. They weren't usually aggressive toward humans, but something about the way it lingered unsettled her. It wasn't just passing through, it was watching them. Jake started to back away slowly, instinctively moving toward Carla. She kept her eyes on the shark, willing it to lose interest. For a moment, this worked. The shark turned slightly and swam parallel to them, and relief washed over her. Then in an instant, everything changed. The shark pivoted sharply, its entire posture shifting from curiosity to predation. It propelled itself forward, its mouth slightly open, revealing rows of sharp teeth. It was heading straight for Jake. Carla didn't think, she reacted. She pushed Jake to the side with a powerful kick, putting herself between him and the charging shark. Before she could process what was happening, a searing pain exploded in her leg. The shark had clamped down just above her knee. The force of the bite sent a shockwave of agony through her body. The water around her turned red as the shark's teeth tore through muscle and bone. She screamed, though the water muffled the sound. Instinctively, she tried to pry the shark off, but it was too strong. It shook its head violently, dragging her deeper. Jake, wide-eyed with terror, saw his mother disappear beneath the surface. He hesitated only for a second before diving after her. He grabbed her arm, pulling with every ounce of strength he had. Blood clouded the water, making it impossible to see clearly, but he refused to let go. The lifeguards on shore had spotted the disturbance above them. A whistle blew, followed by the frantic movement of rescue personnel sprinting toward the water. Tourists gasped in horror, some covering their mouths, others shouting for help. Jake kicked hard, using the adrenaline surging to fight against the shark's pull. Then, just as suddenly as it had attacked, the shark released its grip. Perhaps it was startled by the sudden commotion, or simply decided its prey wasn't worth the struggle. Whatever the reason, it turned and vanished into the depths. Jake didn't stop to think. He wrapped an arm around Carla's shoulders and swam for the surface. His heart pounded as he struggled to keep her head above water. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. Blood continued to pour from her wound, staining the ocean red. 2 lifeguards reached them within seconds, throwing a flotation device toward Jake. One of them, Daniel Reyes, a seasoned rescue swimmer, took Carla from him and secured her against the buoy. The other lifeguard, Alyssa Chen, grabbed Jake and ensured he was unhurt. The rescue team worked quickly. As they reached the shore, a stretcher was already waiting. Paramedics pressed thick bandages against Carla's leg, their faces tense as they assessed the damage. Jake stayed by her side, his hands shaking. The resort's guests had gathered, whispering in hushed voices. Some held their phones up, capturing the moment. Others looked on, visibly shaken. Carla's breathing was shallow, but she squeezed Jake's hand weakly, letting him know she was still there. Within minutes, she was loaded into an ambulance, sirens blaring as it sped toward the nearest hospital in Nassau. Jake rode with her, never letting go of her hand. He barely registered the paramedic speaking, his mind still replaying the attack over and over. The vacation that was supposed to be perfect had turned into a nightmare. Hours later, Carla lay in a hospital bed, her leg wrapped in thick bandages. The doctors had stopped the bleeding, but the wound was severe. She would need extensive surgery and months of rehabilitation. Jake sat beside her, his face still pale. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The attack had changed them. The ocean, which had once seemed so peaceful, now carried a darkness they had never seen before. The morning was calm as Maria Delgado secured her gear and pushed her kayak into the cool waters of the Pacific Ocean. It was August 14th, 2020, and she had been waiting all week. The coastline near Big Sur, California, stretched behind her, the cliffs rising sharply from the shore. Maria had often kayaked in these waters, drawn to the solitude and beauty of the rugged coastline. She loved the rhythm of paddling, the gentle rocking of the kayak, and the occasional glimpse of sea lions sunning themselves on the rocks. That morning she had left before sunrise, her small red kayak easily cutting through the water. The plan was to paddle along the shoreline, explore a few sea caves, and then head toward a deeper channel known for its marine life. Maria knew these waters well and had always respected them. She had read about shark sightings in the area, but attacks were rare. She carried a whistle and a small knife strapped to her vest. Precautionary measures she had never needed. As the sun rose higher, Maria felt completely at peace. In the distance, she had seen a pod of dolphins, their sleek bodies breaking the surface before disappearing again. She smiled, taking in the moment, unaware that something was lurking beneath her. An hour into her trip, she paddled into deeper waters where the ocean floor dropped suddenly. The shift was subtle, but she could feel it. Her kayak felt smaller, the water darker. She adjusted her grip on the paddle, steadying herself against the gentle waves. Then, something nudged her kayak from below. A hard, deliberate bump sent a jolt through her body. She froze, gripping the paddle tightly. Her first thought was a sea lion, but sea lions didn't hit with that kind of force. She looked around, scanning the water, but saw nothing. A deep sense of unease crept in. Before she could react, the water exploded beneath her. A massive great white shark, at least 16 feet long, surged upward, slamming into the bottom of her kayak. The impact sent Maria flying sideways, her body hitting the water with a splash. Panic shot through her as she surfaced, gasping for air. Her kayak was upside down, rocking from the force of the attack. Maria had trained for emergencies, but nothing prepared her for this. The shark was circling. She could see its dark shape moving beneath her, slow and calculated. The dorsal fin cut through the water, vanishing, then reappearing. Her instincts screamed at her to move. She swam toward her overturned kayak, her arms slicing through the water as fast as possible. Reaching the hull, she grabbed the edge and pulled herself up, her legs kicking frantically beneath her. She could feel the exhaustion setting in, but she couldn't stop. She managed to flip the kayak over, her hands shaking as she gripped the sides. Her paddle was floating a few feet away. She lunged for it, barely securing it before pulling herself onto the seat. She was back on the kayak, but she wasn't safe. The shark hadn't left. It swam closer, its massive body gliding just beneath the surface. Maria's breath came in short gasps. She knew not to splash or make sudden movements, but every instinct screamed to get out of the water. She started paddling, forcing herself to stay steady. Every stroke felt agonizingly slow. The shark followed. It didn't charge or lunge, it just stayed there, watching. Maria aimed for the shallower waters near the cliffs. She had never felt so far from shore. She dug the paddle into the water, propelling herself forward with everything she had. Her arms burned, but she couldn't stop. Then another bump, harder this time. The kayak tilted violently, nearly flipping again. Maria leaned forward, gripping the paddle with both hands. She fought the urge to cry out, knowing that panic wouldn't save her. The shore was closer now, but the shark wasn't giving up. It made another pass, circling wide before coming in again. Maria braced herself, expecting another strike, but as suddenly as it appeared, the shark veered off, its massive tail flicking through the water before disappearing into the depths. She didn't stop paddling. She didn't slow down when the water was clear again, even when she could see the rocky shoreline ahead. Only when her kayak scraped against the shallow reef did she allow herself to collapse forward, her chest heaving. She had made it, but the ocean would never feel the same again. On March 24, 2025, the waters off the coast of South Africa were calm, the sun reflecting off the deep blue waves. 3 Russian friends, Viktor Mikhailov, Leonid Petrov, and Artyom Vasilyev, were aboard the luxury yacht Celestial Dawn, a $5 million vessel known for its state-of-the-art technology and lavish amenities. The trio had been enjoying a day at sea, celebrating Leonid's recent promotion at his investment firm in Moscow. Along with them were a small crew and a couple of other guests, soaking in the ocean breeze and the freedom of the open water. The yacht had been anchored a few miles offshore, a perfect spot for relaxation. Viktor, Leonid, and Artyom lounged near the stern, their legs stretched out as they sipped imported whiskey. They had no reason to suspect danger until an enormous shadow passed beneath the hull, a crew member first noticed a dark shape moving ominously below the surface. Moments later, an 18-foot great white shark emerged from the depths, its dorsal fin slicing through the water like a blade. At first, it circled the yacht methodically, its body gliding effortlessly through the waves. Some aboard the vessel laughed nervously, while others marveled at the sight of the massive predator. But then, without warning, the shark rammed the hull with an alarming force. The impact sent a deep, shuddering vibration through the yacht, rattling glasses and causing a few guests to stumble. Before anyone could react, the shark struck again, this time with more aggression. The force of the impact sent Victor, Leonid, and Artyom sprawling toward the edge of the deck. Artyom had been reclining dangerously close to the railing and lost his balance first. As he attempted to steady himself, another powerful hit from the shark jolted the yacht, sending all three men overboard. The water closed over them as they plunged into the ocean. Panic erupted on the yacht as the crew scrambled to throw lifebuoys into the water. Artyom surfaced first, gasping for air, his eyes wide with terror. Victor emerged a second later, disoriented, but alive. Leonid, however, barely had time to breathe before the shark struck. The great white moved with horrifying speed. Its jaws clamped down on Leonid's leg, dragging him downward as he thrashed violently. Blood stained the water almost instantly, sending waves of red rippling across the surface. Victor and Artyom, barely a few feet away, watched in horror as their friend struggled against the sheer power of the predator. Artyom attempted to swim toward Leonid, but the shark released its grip only to bite again, tearing into Leonid's side. The water muffled his screams. On board, the crew worked frantically to retrieve them, throwing ropes and flotation devices, but the yacht's large frame made it difficult to maneuver quickly. As Leonid fought to keep his head above water, the shark suddenly turned its attention to Victor. The massive predator lunged, its serrated teeth catching his arm. A searing pain shot through Victor's body as the shark's teeth tore through flesh. He managed to wrench himself free just as the yacht's crew finally got hold of a rope. He clung to it desperately as they hoisted him back on board, his bloodied arm hanging limply by his side. Artyom, still treading water, was inches from the shark's tail. It whipped around, barely missing him, but the turbulence nearly pulled him under. He kicked frantically, reaching for the lifebuoy thrown his way. Just as the shark seemed to be preparing for another strike, crew members managed to pull Artyom back onto the deck. Leonid was the last to be rescued. His body was limp, his wounds severe. The crew fought to keep him conscious as they applied pressure to the deep lacerations. The yacht immediately returned toward the shore, a distress call already sent to local authorities. When they reached the nearest port, an emergency medical team was waiting. Leonid had lost significant blood, but thanks to quick intervention, he survived. Victor's arm required extensive surgery, and Artyom escaped with only minor injuries. The luxury of their day at sea had turned into a nightmare. Following the attack, South African authorities issued a warning, increasing shark monitoring efforts in the area. Marine biologists speculated that baiting practices from nearby fishing vessels or territorial behavior could have triggered the great white's aggression. Victor, Leonid, and Artyom later spoke about the incident with the press, warning others about the unpredictable nature of the ocean. Though they survived, the memory of the attack haunted them, each crash of the waves a reminder of the terrifying power lurking beneath the surface. In the weeks that followed, news of the attack spread rapidly. Experts weighed in on the behavior of the great white, discussing whether environmental factors had contributed to the shark's aggression. Some suggested that overfishing had disrupted natural feeding patterns, making sharks bolder in their search for food. Others theorized that the yacht's vibrations might have triggered a predatory response, mistaking the vessel for a distressed animal. The yacht, despite its staggering price tag, was heavily damaged. Marine engineers estimated that the hull had suffered multiple fractures, and the repair costs were projected to reach hundreds of thousands of dollars. The Celestial Dawn, once a pristine example of luxury, now bore the scars of a battle with one of nature's most fearsome predators. It remained docked for weeks, and its owners hesitated to return it to sea. Leonid, after undergoing surgery, faced a long road to recovery. His injuries left him unable to walk unaided for months. The attack had changed him. Where he had once been a fearless traveler, he found himself uneasy near open water. Victor, too, struggled to cope with the trauma, his injured arm serving as a permanent reminder of the terrifying ordeal. Artyom, though the least physically injured, admitted that the psychological scars ran deep. None of them would ever see the ocean in the same way again. Authorities continued investigating the incident, collecting data on great white shark activity in the region. Some conservationists warned against vilifying the species, arguing that humans had encroached on their territory. Others called for stricter safety measures to prevent future encounters. The debate raged on, but one thing was certain: the attack had left an indelible mark on those involved. As Victor, Leonid, and Artyom tried to return to their normal lives, they found themselves drawn back to the ocean in an unexpected way. Despite their fear, they began advocating for better education about sharks, hoping to help others understand these misunderstood creatures. Their harrowing experience, once a personal nightmare, became a story of survival that captivated the world. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the turquoise waters off the coast of New South Wales, Australia. It was June 12, 2009, and 32-year-old Matt Harris was enjoying one of his favorite pastimes, surfing. A seasoned surfer, Matt had spent years mastering the waves at this particular stretch of coastline near Byron Bay, a well-known surf spot that attracted both locals and tourists. The waves were strong but manageable, rolling in steady sets, and the ocean's surface shimmered in the fading light. Matt had been out for a few hours, catching waves and relishing the solitude of the sea. The beach was sparsely populated, with only a handful of other surfers spread across the water. As he paddled out for what he planned to be his last ride of the evening, he took a moment to soak in the beauty around him. The horizon stretched endlessly, and the distant sound of seagulls filled the air. But beneath the surface, something was lurking. Unbeknownst to Matt, a 12-foot tiger shark had been patrolling the area, drawn closer by the splashing of surfers. Unlike great whites, tiger sharks were known for their aggressive nature and indiscriminate eating habits. This predator lingered just beyond the breakers, moving silently through the deep. As Matt turned his board and prepared to paddle into a wave, the water beneath him seemed to shift. A dark shadow passed below, barely noticeable in the dimming light. Then, without warning, the shark attacked. The force of the impact sent Matt flying off his board. Before he could react, the shark's massive jaws clamped down on his right leg, teeth slicing through muscle and bone instantly. A deep, guttural sound of pain escaped him as he was yanked beneath the surface. The surrounding water turned crimson as panic surged through him. Nearby surfers heard the commotion. One of them, a friend of Matt's named Daniel Hayes, turned just in time to see the horrifying scene unfold. He paddled furiously toward Matt, shouting for help as the shark thrashed violently, dragging its victim further under. Realizing what was happening, the others began swimming toward shore, terrified and powerless to intervene. Matt fought with everything he had, punching at the shark's snout and desperately trying to break free. But the tiger shark was relentless. It released him briefly, only to strike again, this time tearing into his lower torso. The damage was catastrophic. As the predator pulled him deeper, his strength faded. The ocean swallowed his screams. Daniel reached the spot where Matt had been moments ago, but all that remained was a blood-streaked board floating on the surface. For a terrifying few seconds, there was no sign of Matt. Then, miraculously, his body resurfaced, his face pale, his breaths shallow. Daniel grabbed him, pulling him onto his board by summoning every ounce of strength. The sight was horrific. Matt's leg was almost entirely gone, and deep wounds covered his torso. Blood continued to pour from his body, mixing into the water around them. The other surfers had already reached the shore, frantically waving for help. A group of beachgoers rushed forward, some calling emergency services while others sprinted into the shallows to assist. Daniel paddled with all his might, dragging Matt toward the sand, his arms burning with exertion. By the time they reached the shore, Matt was barely conscious. His breathing was labored, his pulse weak. Several bystanders, including a nurse who happened to be on the beach, applied pressure to his wounds, desperately trying to stem the bleeding. The shark had taken too much. His body was shutting down. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but as they worked frantically to save him, his vital signs began to fade. Despite their best efforts, Matt succumbed to his injuries before they could get him to the hospital. The news of his death spread quickly, shocking the local surfing community. He had been a beloved figure, a skilled surfer, a mentor to younger riders, and a man with an infectious love for the ocean. His loss left a void that was impossible to fill. Following the attack, authorities launched an investigation. Experts speculated that the shark had been drawn to the area due to increased fish activity, possibly from nearby fishing boats discarding scraps. In response, officials heightened shark monitoring, implementing new warning systems and safety measures to prevent further tragedies. The attack reignited debates over shark culling, though many conservationists argued that such incidents, while tragic, were rare and that sharks were vital to the marine ecosystem. Matt's funeral was held a week later, attended by hundreds of friends, family members, and fellow surfers. The surfing community honored him with a paddle-out ceremony, forming a circle in the ocean where they shared memories, shed tears, and celebrated his life. Though the ocean had claimed him, it had also been his greatest passion, a fact that those who knew him best found both heartbreaking and poetic. In the years following the attack, his family worked to establish the Matt Harris Ocean Awareness Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to educating people on ocean safety, shark conservation, and emergency response training for water sports enthusiasts. His story became a sobering reminder of the ocean's unpredictability and the respect it demanded. The waves off Byron Bay continued to roll as they always had, carrying the memory of a man who had lived and died, chasing them. The waters off the Palawan, Philippines coast were calm on the morning of August 7, 2001. Andres Reyes, a 40-year-old fisherman, waded through the shallow reefs near the island's outskirts, hauling his fishing nets. He had been doing this for decades, providing his family with the sea's bounty. The tropical sun hung low in the sky, casting golden reflections across the water's surface. It was a morning like any other, or so it seemed. Andres worked efficiently, untangling small fish from his net and tossing them into a weathered bamboo basket strapped to his back. The water was only waist-deep, the coral reef sprawling beneath him, teeming with life. Schools of silverfish darted through the shallows, and the occasional sea turtle glided past. To an outsider, the scene might have appeared peaceful, but beneath the surface danger lurked. An 11-foot bull shark prowled the murky depths beyond the reef, drawn in by the scent of fish struggling in Andres's net. Unlike great whites, bull sharks thrived in salt and fresh water, making them especially dangerous in coastal shallows where fishermen often worked. This particular shark, possibly disoriented by the presence of human activity, began circling closer. Andres, oblivious to the lurking predator, continued his routine. He had seen sharks before, but they usually kept their distance. There was no reason to suspect this day would be any different, but then in an instant the water exploded. A massive force struck him from below, knocking him off his feet. Before he could react, razor-sharp teeth sank into his leg, the crushing pressure sending a shockwave of pain through his body. Andres screamed, his voice drowned by the splashing chaos around him. The bull shark thrashed violently, dragging him deeper as blood billowed into the water. Nearby fishermen heard the commotion and turned just in time to see the horrifying sight. Andres flailed, his arms reaching desperately toward the surface, but the predator's grip was unrelenting. His companions rushed toward him, wielding long bamboo poles in a frantic attempt to scare off the shark. One of them struck the beast's side, momentarily startling it. The shark released Andres, but the damage had been done. His lower leg was nearly severed, his body limp as he surfaced. Two fishermen grabbed him, hauling him onto a wooden banca boat as quickly as possible. The once pristine waters around them had turned a dark crimson. Andres gasped for air, his breaths ragged and weak. His friends pressed their hands against his mangled leg, trying to slow the bleeding, but the wound was catastrophic. They shouted to the others on shore, signaling for help as they paddled furiously toward land. When they reached the beach, villagers rushed to assist. A makeshift tourniquet was fashioned from a torn fishing net, but Andres's pulse was fading. His wife, Maria, arrived moments later, her face stricken with horror as she saw his lifeless form. Despite their desperate efforts, Andres succumbed to his injuries before medical help could arrive. The community mourned his death deeply. He had been a beloved figure, known for his generosity and wisdom. Shaken by the attack, his fellow fishermen became wary of returning to the water. Bull sharks had always been present in the area, but this incident served as a grim reminder of their unpredictable nature. In the weeks following the tragedy, local authorities and marine biologists investigated the attack. Some speculated that overfishing had forced sharks closer to shore in search of food. Others believed the increased fish waste dumped near fishing sites had unintentionally lured predators into human territory. In response, officials imposed stricter waste disposal regulations and advised fishermen to avoid early morning and late afternoon fishing when sharks were most active. Despite the fear lingering in the community, life in Palawan carried on. The sea, ever indifferent, continued to provide for the island's people. But for those who had witnessed the attack, the ocean no longer felt as safe as it once had. Andres's name became a cautionary tale, spoken in hushed voices by those who waded into the shallows, a stark reminder of the silent dangers that lurked beneath the waves. Maria, left to raise their 3 children alone, struggled in the wake of Andres's death. With no other source of income, she turned to selling dried fish and handmade crafts to tourists. The family's grief was compounded by financial hardship, but the local community rallied behind them. Fellow fishermen, though shaken, pooled resources to support her, ensuring that her children could stay in school. Still, the absence of Andres was felt every day. His laughter and strength are now only memories. Some of the younger fishermen began carrying makeshift spears or knives when wading into the water, a feeble attempt at protection against an enemy they could barely see. Stories of Andres's attack spread beyond Palawan, reaching the ears of officials in Manila. A marine conservation group was interested in the event, sending a team to study the local shark population and educate fishermen on reducing potential encounters. While some villagers welcomed the knowledge, others saw it as little comfort against the unpredictable forces of nature. Months later, the beach where Andres had launched his boat each morning remained eerily quiet. Fewer fishermen dared to venture as deep into the water as before, the memory of that bloodied morning still fresh in their minds. Even seasoned divers who had once marveled at Palawan's underwater beauty hesitated at the thought of slipping beneath the waves. The attack had not only taken a life, it had reshaped the way the community viewed the ocean, replacing respect with fear. Yet, despite the tragedy, some chose to see Andres's death as a lesson, rather than a reason for permanent dread. His eldest son, Daniel, only 15 at the time of the attack, vowed to carry on his father's legacy. Years later, he became one of Palawan's strongest advocates for responsible fishing and marine conservation, working alongside scientists to better understand the creatures that had once torn his family apart. He believed that fear alone could not dictate their lives, that the sea, for all its dangers, was still a gift meant to be respected, not abandoned. The early hours of a cool December morning in 2016 had seen the sun just peeking over Baja California's rocky coastline. The squawking of seagulls circling overhead was the only sound to break the rhythmic crashing of the waves as they rolled in slowly. Those who lived along this isolated section of the Mexican coast were accustomed to the smell of damp earth and salt in the air. As an experienced marine biologist, Isabella Cruz had developed a routine of walking on the beach in the early morning. At that time of day, the world seemed unspoiled. The sand was still cool underfoot, and her footprints were the only ones there. She had studied the marine life in these waters for years, recording everything from stranded jellyfish to migratory whales. However, something was different that morning. Walking along the shore, she noticed a huge, motionless shape in the distance. She initially believed it to be a piece of driftwood, but as she approached, the enormity of it caused her heart to race. A great white shark, which was about 20 feet long, washed up on the beach, its enormous body partially buried where the tide had carried it. It was an eerie and breathtaking sight. The shark's once strong body was now motionless, revealing its pale underside to the sky. The jagged, nearly surgical-looking deep gaping wounds along its side were what really attracted Isabella's attention. Instinctively, she reached for her phone and moved closer, crouching next to the creature. This was the only thing she had ever seen that was worthy of being recorded. The signs of predation were instantly apparent to her trained eye. The bite marks were too big for any other shark to be responsible for. They bore the distinct pattern of an orca attack instead. Although she had read about orcas hunting great whites, seeing the fallout firsthand was a completely different experience. The injuries pointed to a planned kill, most likely the result of an orca or pod immobilizing and killing the shark. The ramifications were enormous. Great white sharks were thought of as apex predators, but it was becoming more and more obvious that orcas could, and in some areas, actively hunt them. She had to do more research. After taking a pair of gloves out of her backpack, Isabella meticulously took tissue samples from the wounds. given that the shark's body was already decomposing. It was most likely dead for a few days before it washed up on the shore. It had been brought in from deeper waters by the tide, but it was still unknown where it had been attacked. She promptly got in touch with Dr. Elias Montes, a fellow marine biologist who focused on predator-prey dynamics. She didn't take long to describe what she had discovered when he picked it up. After listening in silence, he promised to meet her in an hour. Isabella took additional pictures while she waited, recording every detail, including the extent of the wounds, the patterns they created, and the manner in which the flesh had peeled away in some places. She pointed out that the shark's liver, a sign of orca predation, was missing. Great white shark livers were known to be expertly removed by orcas, who were probably attracted to the organ's high fat and nutrient content. Long shadows stretched across the sand as the sun rose higher by the time Elias got there. As he jogged over after parking his truck close to the dunes, his face changed from one of interest to one of shock at the sight of the enormous carcass in front of them. In order to collect more samples before the rising heat accelerated decomposition, they collaborated swiftly. Elias surmised that the attack might have taken place in deeper waters where orcas could ambush their prey. The accuracy of the killings indicated that these were not sporadic incidents. Rather, the orcas had mastered a method and learned behavior that was becoming common among some pods. Isabella's discovery garnered attention for the following few days. Word quickly spread outside of Baja California after local authorities arrived to evaluate the situation. Interest was shown by scientists from marine research institutes who were keen to examine the samples she had gathered. The occasion rekindled conversations about how the dynamics of marine ecosystems were changing. Previously regarded as an uncommon phenomenon, the incident had now been acknowledged as a developing trend. In some areas, orcas, which were highly adaptive and intelligent, were routinely hunting great whites. This behavioral change had the potential to alter the ocean's power dynamics, which had consequences that went beyond mere scientific interest. The discovery was both humbling and thrilling for Isabella. It served as a reminder that mysteries still lingered beneath the ocean's surface despite human research into it. Once regarded as the unchallenged king of the seas, the great white shark was now up against a powerful predator. Over the next few days, the shark carcass slowly vanished, claiming its place among scavengers and the weather. However, the impact of its discovery persisted. Isabella's discoveries aided in continuing studies and allowed researchers to piece together the changing dynamics between two of the most dangerous predators in the ocean. Isabella kept working even after the tide had erased the last remnants of the shark, because she was determined to learn all the secrets the ocean still held. Waters off the South African coast of Gansbaai have long drawn adventurers and thrill-seekers, often referred to as the Great White Shark Capital of the world. It was a well-known arena for cage diving. The town itself, a sleepy fishing community, had developed into a major destination for marine tourism, attracting tourists keen to encounter the most dreaded predator in the ocean. With charters leaving the tiny harbor every day to transport visitors to the notorious Dyer Island area, shark diving had grown into a separate industry by 2011. Although she loved to travel, Kelsey Aldridge had never thought of herself as an adventurer. She was a budding fashion influencer with a sharp sense of style who had established her social media following by sharing her travels. This time, her journey took her to South Africa, where she had the opportunity to do something really risky: go shark diving. She accepted to join a group of divers despite her inexperience because she never turned down a chance to create content. Her primary worry, though, was how she would shield her pale skin from the intense African sun, rather than the sharks themselves. She discovered a strange device that was popular among influencers: a shark-repellent bracelet that allegedly emitted electromagnetic waves upsetting a shark's sensory receptors, while perusing an online travel forum at the last minute. The branding was polished and convincing, and the testimonials were excellent. Swayed by the prospect of increased security and a fashionable accessory, Kelsey placed her order right away. By the time she got to Gansbaai, she was positive that she had made a wise choice. With the assurance of someone who had read half an article and skimmed a review, she proudly showed off the bracelet to the other divers as they got ready for the trip. Although she observed that the waters were considerably rougher than they looked in the glossy Instagram photos, She had seen that the boat ride to the dive site was comparatively uneventful. In order to attract sharks, the crew started chumming the waters after arriving at the designated location and throwing a strong concoction of fish guts and blood overboard. Even though the aroma alone made Kelsey regret eating a light breakfast, she forced herself to concentrate on her objective, getting the ideal underwater photo. The group was buzzing with excitement as the first divers entered the cage. However, Kelsey had an alternative notion. She wasn't content to merely observe from a prison cell. There was no need to confine her if her bracelet performed as promised. Getting out of the cage would provide a more immersive experience, and more importantly, better pictures, she thought. When her turn came, she purposefully stayed outside the cage and slipped into the water. She gasped when she first felt the chill, but she soon adapted. Her gaze darted about, looking for movement in the deep blue. Then a shadow came up from underneath. It was a tiger shark, a species notorious for its unpredictability and lack of hesitation when it comes to human encounters. Instead of pounding with fear, Kelsey's heart pounded with excitement. It was her time. As long as she didn't move, she thought she was safe because the bracelet was meant to keep the shark at bay. Aiming for the ideal shot, she grabbed her waterproof camera. With slow, methodical movements, the tiger shark kept getting closer. Confident that the bracelet was effective, she stepped closer. The others in the cage were frantically pointing at her to back off, but she ignored them. In an instant, the shark suddenly shortened the distance between them by flicking its tail. She felt the impact, a sharp, crushing pressure on her forearm before she could respond. She discovered too late that the bracelet had done nothing at all, and a sudden intense pain jolted through her nerves. She yanked her arm back in panic, the water clouding with a deep crimson. The mangled remnant of what had once been a smooth, flawless arm was left behind when the shark, momentarily bewildered, let go and swam away. Immediately, one of the boat's crew members threw out a rescue line, and another diver grabbed her and pulled her back toward the cage. The chaos was too much to handle. Someone was calling for a first aid kit, and another person was attempting to keep her conscious. In the meantime, Kelsey was in a state of shock, finding it difficult to comprehend what had just transpired. Though the pain was excruciating, the realization that she had put herself in harm's way for a social media post was even more unbearable. Her arm was tightly bandaged as the crew rushed back to shore, working quickly to staunch the bleeding. An ambulance was waiting when they reached the dock. The paramedics took over, stabilizing her before rushing her to the nearest hospital. Despite the severity of the bite, she had not lost any limbs, though a few centimeters in either direction, and she might have lost the use of her hand. She was told by the doctors that she was fortunate, but she didn't feel fortunate. As she lay in the hospital bed looking through the pictures she had taken moments before the attack, the reality of the situation set in. The shark was only a few inches away, its dark eyes fixed on hers in the last picture, which was captured in time. After being proudly worn on her wrist, the bracelet now appeared to be a pointless trinket. Word of the incident spread swiftly, and soon her inbox was overflowing with messages. Some of them were mocking her and others were worried. Using her experience as a cautionary tale, the travel forums that had initially praised the bracelet were now rife with cautions against it. The bracelet manufacturer discreetly stopped production after influencers discussed the risks of endorsing unconfirmed goods. Regarding Kelsey, the incident altered her in unexpected ways. Over time, the physical wounds would heal, but the lesson would never go away. There were no shortcuts when it came to safety, and she discovered this in the most agonizing way. She had almost lost much more than her dignity by putting her faith in unproven tricks. She returned to social media months after her injuries healed, but her strategy changed. The gaudy promotions and mindlessly adopted fashions were no longer there. She instead emphasized responsible travel and real experiences. She didn't want to go through the shark-repellent disaster again, but she also understood that by telling the truth, even though it was embarrassing, someone else would not make the same error. She would never forget the lesson she had learned from the ocean that day. She carried the bite mark as evidence that she had survived her own folly, not as a badge of shame, even though it remained a permanent reminder. The hard-won knowledge that no fad device could ever take the place of common sense had ultimately proven to be more repellent than the bracelet.